What's going on, everybody? Nick from the Sound Coop here, and today we're going to dig into some Edge of Breakup tones with the California Tweed by Mesa Boogie. Now, I've had this amp for about a year. I don't have a lot of gear buying regrets. I completely regret not getting into the Tweed thing sooner. And I also kind of regret not getting into the Mesa Boogie thing sooner. I've always associated Mesa Boogie with like modern high gain amps. This amp is not that at all. This amp is probably the most versatile amp I've ever played in my whole life. If I had a bar gig where I was covering like rock, blues, Americana, and pop music, this would be the amp that I would take. It will do all of those styles amazingly well. I'm constantly impressed. Now, as far as the tones I want to cover today, I'm going to leave this amp basically set as I have it right now. We'll go over that in a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change guitars. So we're going to run this Stratocaster first. Then I'm going to run my Gibson Murphy Lab Junior. The Junior is absolutely exquisite going into this amp. They are, as far as I'm concerned, the perfect pair. And then we're going to end on some Stratocaster type stuff. Now, as far as the sounds that I want to cover today, I want to get into some Tom Petty stuff, both Tom's electric rhythm parts as well as Mike Campbell's lead parts. I want to get into some Black Crowes stuff, some of like the more gentler stuff, not the super high gain stuff, but some of their more ballady Edge of Breakup type stuff. And I want to get into some Mike McCready Pearl Jam type stuff as well. But what we're going to start off with is we're going to start off with Wendy Melvoin's tone from Sheryl Crow's My Favorite Mistake. This is hands down one of the most amazing Edge of Breakup tones that I've ever come across. And this amp will do it pretty darn well. But before we get into all the tones, let me just go over the setup real quick. Let's get into it. All right, so as far as the setup, let's go over the front panel of the amp real quick. We're going into the normal input. We're running the gain somewhere between noon and 3 o'clock, probably like around 2. The treble's at noon. The middle is also somewhere between noon and 3 o'clock. The bass is a little bit past 9, maybe 10 o'clock. The presence is also somewhere between noon and 3 o'clock, probably like 2:30. And the master is a little bit past 3 o'clock. Now, I'm not running any reverb. And on the multi-watt mode, we're running it at 20 watts, which is great for being able to push the front end a little bit more without everything getting too loud on the cab. Now, as far as the cab, we're running the head out to the matching 2x12 California Tweed cab. On the cab, I have a Slate Digital ML2 modeling microphone. Now, when the modeling microphone gets into my Pro Tools, I'm actually running it to 2 different channels. One of those channels is running a Royer 121 emulation. The other channel is running a U67 emulation, and I have each of those channels panned hard right and hard left respectively. So that's basically how we're achieving the tone today. And I think towards the end, I'll change this a little bit, but my goal is to leave this amp as it is and just change out different guitars and just kind of show you how one very simple, very neutral setting on this front panel will sound slightly different or significantly different depending on which guitar you plug in on the front end. Let's get into some tones. All right, now that we've gone over the amp setup, let's just, as promised, get into Wendy Melvoin's tone from Sheryl Crow's My Favorite Mistake. Now, I watched an interview with Wendy from Vertex Effects where she went over the signal chain that was used for that recording. And she said that she used a Tweed Twin. She said that she used a slapback off a 2-inch tape. And she says that she used a little bit of compression. So I think I've created the slapback and the compression, which is a very small amount of compression in my Pro Tools. I don't think the compression's really adding much to the sound, just kind of leveling things out a little bit. And I think the amp by itself gets us pretty darn close. So let's check this out. Pretty close, but we're not quite all the way there. Here's another interesting thing I saw in that interview. Wendy tried to recreate that tone with her modern pedal board, and in the process, she used a Klon. Now, I'm not a big Klon fan, or at least I haven't been until I got this amp, The clon is wonderful for shifting the tonal and overdrive character of this California Tweed in a really cool way. If you're not a clon guy, you probably don't know this, but the clon has a very specific sort of EQ to it, a very specific focused mid-range. So what I basically tried to do is I tried to dial in the clon where it's not really doing a lot of added gain or a lot of distortion. I'm mainly using this thing as an EQ unit. Now, I think it's adding a little bit of distortion, but not a whole ton. But to me, when you put this thing in the process, it gets the tone a lot closer to what's on that Sheryl Crow record. Now, I don't have a real clon. What I have is the Molyneux that's made by Mythos, and the one I have is the Wildwood version, which is essentially Zach's faithful recreation of his original vintage clon. And this is great because it's just very true to the original unit. Just for context again, so here's just the amp. Pretty close. If we put the clon in, that's a lot closer to me. Taking the clon off again, it has a little bit of a hi-fi sound to it, like the top and the bottom are as extended out in the EQ range as possible. When you put this clon in, it sort of focuses the mid-range a little bit. And where I really notice it, taking the clon off, I notice it on these. That's the clon off. Clon on. Off. Very hi-fi. On. A little bit more mid-range focused. Really, really cool. So I just love that. I might have a little bit more overdrive happening there than the record, but if you're interested in context, I'm basically going to take this exact signal chain and I'm going to play it over the backing tracks and I'm going to have that uploaded to my Instagram. So if you want to hear this actual setup in context with the record, go to my Instagram. It's the_sound_coop at Instagram. And you can check out the playthrough there with the actual tones matched against the backing tracks. And of course, I will make sure you guys get a picture of how the clon is set. So anyway, really fun tone there. Let's try some Tom Petty type stuff. All right, so sticking with that sort of Americana vibe that's, very similar to what Sheryl Crow was going for, sort of the mix between rock, blues, and pop, let's just mess around with breakdown a little bit. Tom will often do a lot of stuff electric on an amp, like his rhythm parts. And to me, you can really get a very Tom Petty-esque edge of breakup rhythm sound out of this. So we're in the neck position here still, same as the last one, and I've turned the clon off. So we're just now running the amp again. So I love that. Now, another thing is, like, if you listen to that track, I think the chorus parts where he's doing the A minor to the G to the F, back up to the G, I think those are being pushed into the amp a little bit more. So in my Telecaster here, I have the 4-way switch, which basically takes these two pickups and puts them in series, makes them a humbucker. So let's go there real quick. Now, to me, that's pushing the amp a little bit more. The humbucker is a little bit louder. which is really nice for just getting a little more distortion out of this thing. It's very Tom Petty-esque from my point of view. I don't know if it exactly matches the record, but pretty close. It definitely has like a very similar vibe. If we go back to the third position, the neck pickup, you can also do the Mike Campbell sort of a thing. And if you listen on that Tom Petty record, those parts that Mike plays in the beginning are very clean, and as the song progresses, it gets sort of more and more dirty. So you can also put this thing back in the series position for the humbucker and get the same sort of a vibe with a little bit more distortion. Pretty close. I really like the way that sounds. It feels really nice. The amp has like a nice breakup to it. So whether you're running this in like a single coil or a humbucker type setup, this amp really gives you a very classic, traditional Americana sort of blues rock kind of a thing. I'm constantly stunned by this amp. It's just, it does so many things. But in the interest of trying something a little bit different, let's switch out the Telecaster for the Gibson Murphy Lab Jr., which is, it's drool-worthy. I love it. So let's try that out real fast. All right, so we got the Murphy Lab Jr. out. Now, I'm not changing anything on the panel, as I said. This is going to be pushing the amp a little bit more. The output of this P90 is significantly greater than what was happening in my Telecaster. So, maybe about 6 dB more gain going into the front end of the amp. It's still going to be edge of breakup, but we're going to be driving the amp a little bit more. And there's something about this rig at the edge of breakup setup that reminds me of the Black Crowes, and especially like some of the lighter stuff. So we're in open G here with this guitar, and let's just run through one of my favorite Black Crowes tunes. I really love the way that this amp behaves with this guitar. I'm going to do a video in the near future going over some really heavy overdrives with this guitar and this amp, but today, like I said, we're staying pretty much focused around the edge of breakup stuff. So. I really love that. Now, you can also turn the tone pot down a little bit. We're going to at about 8 there, just to get a little bit of the hair off of it. That sounds killer, but I really do like it cranked up better. It just sounds so killer. Something about, I don't know. This guitar is magical, and I just love this amp. So to me, they're like a perfect pair. You can just do all kinds of fun, like edge of breakup rock stuff. Killer. I just absolutely love these two as a pair. Amazing. I think any kind of a bridge style P90 will get you a very similar vibe through this amp. So if you're a P90 guy, California Tweed, definitely for you. Let's move on to something a little bit more Stratty. All right, so if you're a Stratocaster guy like me, I think you'll probably love this amp. I put out a video a couple months back basically showing how this amp will do some really amazing high headroom, high volume, low distortion, clean tones, which was not something that I had expected out of this amp. I didn't really expect it to sort of outperform my 2-rock in terms of cleans. The cleans from this amp are stellar. So with that in mind, I'm going to adjust the panel a little bit. Now that we've gone through some tones with some other guitars, this is basically the lowest output as far as pickups guitar that I've showed off today. So I think what we're going to do here is, after I kind of show you how it sounds as is, I'm going to just turn a couple knobs and just change things just a little bit to sort of get a vibe that I think will, show off Edge of Breakup with this guitar a little bit better. But just for context, here's where we're at with the setup that we've been using so far. So there's a little bit of distortion happening there, not a whole lot. So that's basically what I want to do, is I just want to turn up the input gain a little bit. I think that was a good example of how this thing will sound very much like a Fender Blackface. Although, you can really crank the master and turn down the input gain more and get fully clean, no distortion at all, which kind of blew my mind. I expected this thing to have great overdrive tones. I did not expect it to be such an amazing clean platform amp, and especially if you're running it at the 40-watt mode with less input gain, very clean. You can just, smack the heck out of a guitar like this and not get any distortion out of it, which is very, very handy. As far as covering a wide range of vibes, like I said, this will do pop, straight up clean pop, just as well as it will do any of the Americana styles. But let's mess with it a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn up the input gain just a little bit, and I do mean just a little bit. We're just going to move it to a little bit closer to 3, not a whole lot. And then because we're doing that, if you don't know, anytime you're turning up the input gain on a Tweed amp, you're going to start getting way more lows and low mids. It's kind of the vibe of the overdrive character. So I'm going to turn up the presence just a little bit also. But again, small adjustment, but let's just see what it does. I just love that. That kind of reminds me of the Mike McCready thing. And I have a suspicion that when McCready was doing stuff in the studio, he was probably using a couple of different amps and sort of using one amp for clean sounds, one amp for dirtier sounds, and then blending them to taste on a mixing board. The cool thing about this amp is if you set it right, you can kind of get the clean thing and the dirty thing out of one amp. And I think this sort of speaks to the magic of the overdrive character in this amp. So before getting this amp, I really love to get my overdrives from a Marshall. The thing about a Marshall overdrive character is a lot of the overdrive sits between 1 and 3K, which is also kind of where a vocal sits. And so the problem with that, at least in a recording context, or maybe in a live context too, but definitely in a recording context, is that the higher overdrives as far as frequency can often be sitting in a range that will be competing with your vocal. And the thing that I love about this is it keeps the overdrive character sort of in the low mids and stays out of that upper mid range, which A, doesn't compete with the vocal as bad, and I think B, it allows the top end of the amp to stay intact even when you're driving it, right? So if we just play that, the top end is still very clean. Very clean sounding, right? So it's got a little bit of hair on it there. There's a little bit of distortion happening, but it kind of leaves those sort of strings alone. Not entirely. Like if you start stacking multiple strings when you're playing them, like 2 or 3 strings is going to give you more distortion character than just playing a single note. But it kind of leaves the upper frequencies intact, which is really nice. It really reminds me of like a 2-amp setup, again, where you have 1 amp doing cleans, 1 amp doing distortions. Kind of gives you everything in one package. And I just love that. I still can't believe it's taken me this long to get into the Tweed thing. And I really regret it because this thing can just do so much between the glassy cleans, the edge of breakup, all the way into like really heavy cranked up distortion. It will do all that too. And I'll make a video on that in the very near future here because when you really start diming out that input gain, this thing is just glorious. But I could spend a whole video just doing that. So stay tuned for that in the future. But anyway, if you guys like this video, please like and subscribe. If you guys have any questions about the amp or about anything that was happening here with the guitars or the tones, leave me a comment. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.